It's all thinking about it.
All right, so we're going to get started. So we had, I think there was north of like 50 people yesterday, so it's still good to see like a strong crowd come out for this last session. So I think most people have gone ahead and come to this already that are going to come, but I'm really glad to see everyone here today. And we have some people from Triumph here, a few different parishioners, so it's good to have other people joining the church as well. But we'll go ahead and start with a prayer, and I'll jump right into it. It's a rather long presentation. I clocked an hour and 10 minutes for both sessions yesterday, but today I have as much time to stay afterwards as you have questions for, or challenges, or comments, or anything like that, so I'll be able to stick around for a while. But let's begin in prayer, in the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Good and gracious God, we give you thanks again for this day, for allowing us to be in your presence, and to learn more about your law and about your love. I pray that you may help me enter this speech, into this class, and give me the right words to say that's going to have a profound impact on all who are here and all who are listening. Let me speak only what's true, good, and beautiful, and let everything that I say that's not of you fall by the wayside and out of the ears of all who are listening. Give us a spirit of charity and openness, and of compassion and love towards those who identify as transgender, and help us to know how we should walk with them day after day. We pray for all of this through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. Amen. In the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. So it's with a lot of fear and trembling that I come to present this subject in particular, because this is probably the most controversial subject that we have in society right now. So as I was arranging this presentation, and I was proposing this idea to Father Jim, our pastor, it's not a lighthearted subject at all, and it's with a lot of fear and trembling that I come before you, just because this is like a really crucial subject. I think that Catholics understand better, not only so that they can know the truth that the Catholic Church teaches, but also so they can walk with other people with compassion and sympathy who are identifying as transgender. It's not like we can just reject them entirely and cast them off. And we'll go more and more into that in the second section. But I just wanted to, again, give a Catholic response to the transgender movement. So, as an important preliminary point, I want you guys to hold in dichotomy two different things that I think is a really big and stark separation to have. There's a really big difference between my critique of the gender theory that I'm going to give, and then those who fall into, those who identify as transgender. My critique of the theory is not meant to be a personal attack on those who identify as transgender. Indeed, those are the people who I want to be able to walk with, who I want to be able to accompany with, who I want to be able to have compassion towards. And I think that we should all strive to have compassion towards. So just because I attack the gender theory of which they're choosing to base their lives on, I don't mean to attack the human dignity or their own personhood. So if we could all keep those two things separate, I think that would really help. And again, the way that I've constructed this isn't supposed to be a vindictive. I'm not going to be attacking with full force all of the different aspects of gender theory. I'm going to simply try and lay out kind of the basic premises and the conclusions that follow from those premises of gender theory. And I'm going to contrast that with Catholic anthropology, that is, who is man? What does man teach? Is there enough light for the camera? No. Could you leave the second one on? Yeah, perfect. Thank you. I'm going to contrast that with the Catholic understanding of what man is and who man is, and hopefully you can just see which one is more in line with what's true, good, and beautiful. So in the first section, I'm going to be talking about theory. I'm going to go over first gender theory and its understanding of what the human person is, and then I'm going to go over the Catholic anthropology. Anthropology is just a really fancy word of saying who is man, what is man, and how does he relate to God. And then I'm going to go into common objections and questions that people who subscribe to gender theory or just people at large have against kind of the Catholic anthropology, or points that they like to bring up to kind of rebut Catholic anthropology. In the second section, I'll go into a very pastoral mode. So part one will be 5 principles for accompanying other people who identify as transgender. And I'll spend quite a bit of time on that. And then part B will be miscellaneous matters. That's just because I didn't know where else to put them in the PowerPoint presentation. So it's a few closing notes. So that's the general outline of the thing, and we'll start with the theoretical section at first. So what is gender theory? Gender theory is an anthropological, again, big way of saying who is man, what is man. It's an anthropological system that generally denies the difference between men and women and envisions a society without sexual difference. That's coming from a document from the Congregation for Catholic Education, now the Dicastery for Catholic Education, and that's its basic understanding of what gender theory says. So pretty explicitly, like there's no fundamental difference between who men are and who women are. The only big difference would be the fact that you have like a male reproductive system or a female reproductive system. That's like really the only difference between the two. So gender theory promotes a personal identity and emotional intimacy that's radically separated from your biological difference. So again, the fact that you're biologically male or biologically female has nothing to do with your personality and your personal identity. And as a result, your human identity becomes the choice of an individual. So I get to choose what and who I am, and that has nothing to do with reality, like with an objective reality. That's completely immoral. The only thing that matters is how I feel and how I understand myself, and that can change, obviously. It does change over time. And I'll go into all of those kind of in deep a little bit further. So, but first we'll start off with some definitions, help us get our mind around these things. I'll define sex and gender a little bit later on. But sex I'll just use generally to refer to like biological sex, not intercourse. And then gender is how you perceive yourself, and I'll talk about that in a little while. But transgender is one whose biological sex is mismatched with the gender they identify as. The classic example would be I'm male and now I'm identifying as female or vice versa. But there's also, I think there's some universities that have published guidelines that list up to 50 different genders. So it's like, it is it's a sprawling, it's kind of like a sprawling network of different genders you can identify as. Transition, so this can refer to 3 basic types. It's those who go through a language or medical transition to another gender. So you can go through like a linguistic transition only. That means you just change like your name, you change your pronouns, and you change your appearance. And then there's the second part, which starts to involve hormonal medication, taking puberty blockers, taking estrogen or testosterone, or other hormones that will change the makeup of your body, basically. And then the third and most complete transition would be to do both of those on top of surgery. And so that would be to actually alter your secondary sex characteristics, your reproductive organs, and replace them with something that would look like the opposite sex's reproductive organs. So to desist, those who go through a language transition but then go back, so a lot of people in their teens, they'll go through they'll start identifying as the opposite sex or another gender, and then they'll decide that they don't want to do that anymore, so they'll desist. They haven't taken hormonal therapy or surgery at all, so it's just, that's the term that we use for people who only go through the language and appearance aspects. Then the detransition are those who go through both language and medical transition, and that includes hormonal therapy and surgery, and then want to revert back to their original sex. So just general terms that are important to be familiar with. Okay, so I'm going to do a little bit of the origin story of gender theory and locate its big philosophical sources. I'm a big proponent that philosophy controls culture, and that culture follows downstream of philosophy. So whatever happens in high academia ends up filtering into the mass society. I think that we can, as I'm going through these things and explaining them, I hope you can see that. But for philosophy, it's going to be like me trying my best to break down kind of like very high level concepts into terms that we can all like understand and grasp. So I have 4 sources that gender theory really utilizes. The first would be relativism, and this denies that there's any objective truth, especially like moral relativism is super prevalent still in our society. It denies that there's any universal moral values. That means that moral values, moral goods, like the 10 Commandments and other things like that, it basically says that those are not applicable like through all time and through all age. As Catholics believe that there's a moral law and that there's a natural law that applies to every person in every society through every time. Think of the commandment, do not murder. So relativism would deny that that's like applies in all circumstances. So it asserts that everything that exists is of equal value and that nature has no order or purpose. So the fact that I'm a human being doesn't mean that like I'm obliged to act in any certain way. Like our nature has nothing to do like with what we ought to do. Secondly, I point to Simone de Beauvoir, a French philosopher in the 20th century, for existentialism. Her big theory was that existence precedes essence, meaning that we make ourselves as human persons. There's nothing that's given to us. We're born into these bodies, but we don't have like a concrete human nature. That is, that God doesn't give us like our bodies and souls. But it's that we have to make our own human nature. We have to make our own personality. We have to make ourselves, basically. We're not human beings, we're human doings. Right?
What? Human what?
We're not human beings, we're human doings. Like we have to do things in order to cement our own humanity, to cement our own human nature. So again, we create ourselves. Then we go to Foucault's postmodernism. He was a pretty wacky 20th century philosopher, but he had a lot of carrying weight in academia. He says that there is absolutely no such thing as truth. Truth is merely a power game. Any claims for truth, any claims for knowledge, any claims that you know something is merely a power game for you to have knowledge or control over other people and to oppress other people and to reign control of your own power. So saying that the Catholic Church has the fullness of truth would be nothing more than the Catholic Church trying to retain its own power over a certain segment, over like a couple billion people in the world, and to oppress other people who aren't Catholic. So there's absolutely no such thing as truth. So saying that like saying that you're trying to serve the common good, and if you're an elected official, that's nothing other than you trying to retain power for yourself and oppress other people. So that applies to every truth claim. Like, I want you to understand how radical that is. That applies to literally every truth claim. And you'll see how this comes in with Judith Butler and her postmodernism. She's kind of the godmother of gender theory. So she really takes hold of those 3 sources and she builds on them. So she was active, and is still active, in the 20th and 21st century up to today. She's the biggest figure in gender theory academia. So she says that gender is a performance and it's like a social construct. So she kind of takes Simone de Beauvoir's existentialism, like we become human, we have to make ourselves human, but she applies that to gender. Like, she denies the fact that there's no such thing as man or woman, there's no such thing as male or female. Your secondary sex characteristics, your reproductive organs, are as trivial and as meaningless as the fact that you have brown, black, or blonde hair. They're as trivial as the fact that you have like a longer nose. They're as trivial as like basically what you wear. They have no meaning whatsoever. So like a human being is basically an androgynous individual who just so happens to have either male like reproductive system or a female reproductive system. And what happens is the society, whenever we're born in a biological sex, society projects upon us how we should act. So in that sense, gender is a performance. It's a social construct. Like the society tells us this is how men act, this is how women act. Okay, now go and play your part. But she says, let's just get rid of that construct because it's not real. So while she says that biological difference exists, namely the fact that you're biologically male or female with the reproductive organs, they have absolutely no meaning. And the body is a blank canvas that we ourselves can make anything that we want of it. So she's dismantling all norms related to male and female, to the sexual differentiation. So major takeaways and major points in gender theory anthropology is that this is a super atheistic paradigm. If nothing is given to us, if we're just atoms crashing into each other, then there's no God, right? If there's no God, then there's nothing that we have to do with our human nature. There's no expectations that are placed on us. We make ourselves. So this is a godless paradigm. This is a godless anthropology. And a lot of these points are going to tie in with each other quite a bit. So at the risk of being repetitive, but I think they're important to emphasize, that reality, gender, sex, truth, and knowledge are all socially constructed. None of them have any truth or any meaning to them. That they're just all like, this is what society tells us to do, so this is the part that we play out, but we need not play that out. Because society has changed and there's no objective moral values. Humans are not created with a stable human nature, but are the pure products of social forces. Again, there's no real common human nature that binds all of us together. We make ourselves, and we're just products of our social environment. Freedom is not the ability to freely live according to our inbuilt nature. I really like Pope John Paul II. He emphasizes the freedom for excellence, or the ability to do what we ought to do. Like the freedom to do what we should do. And not just freedom as license. I think as Americans, we're particularly susceptible to this definition, because as Americans, we've been told over and over again that what is freedom? Freedom is the ability to do whatever you want to do. It's like the more options, the better. And that's like a really warped vision of freedom that the church is continually like hammered on. Instead, the freedom, like we need to get in our heads that freedom is the ability to live as you ought to, as God intends for us to do as people, to do what's like truly heroic and virtuous and good and beautiful and just. The body is a problem because the body limits freedom. So while the human person and while the human beings are a blank canvas in gender theory, that it's still like the sexual differentiation still presents a problem, right? Because if you're born biologically male, but you identify as female, then the body now becomes something to be overcome, something that's evil, something that like is mismatched. My soul is really a female soul, but my like secondary sex characteristics are getting in the way of me fully embracing that identity. So the body, by its like physical reality, is putting limits upon like one's own radical like subjective thoughts, one's own radical mindset. And so the body now becomes a problem to be overcome. Sex and gender are separated and determined solely by the fully autonomous individual, meaning that sex is seen as two biological categories, and the gender is the way that the differences between the sexes are lived out in each culture. So sex is just the fact that you have like an XX chromosome or XY chromosome, and gender is the way that you like identify as, in the way that you think that your true self is. So that's what makes the separation between those two terms are always connected in Catholic anthropology and Catholic thought. There's really no difference between the two. But in this, they split the two so that you can be one sex and identify as a different gender. And gender definitely has, if you can't already see it, gender has the priority over sex. Gender is way, way, way more important because that's what's going on in your subjective mindset. There's a radical dualism between the body and the soul. The soul can become entrapped in the body. And I think that's the way that like this gender theory anthropology plays out, is that the soul is the real you and your body is just something that's to be like manipulated and used as you will. And again, that dualism between the body and the soul, which is not at all the Catholic worldview, which I'll get into in a little bit, that dualism between the body and soul allows for the mismatch between your sex and your gender. The foundational starting point of each human person is that they are an absolutely free, self-determining individual. So there's nothing that's given to me. All that really matters is my own mindset. And I think this goes to the relativism point. Like, we hear that a lot, like, that's true for you, but not for me. Like, this is my truth, right? Each person gets to determine their own. The reason that we have secondary sex characteristics is for unity between spouses and for the procreation and education of children, right? But now in this, the bodily sex has nothing, again, our reproductive organs have nothing to do with procreation. So some major takeaways, as far as I see it, the end point and the end goal is that each individual should be able to choose their own gender, and society should guard that right. And I think that's where we get the kind of like the language policing and the linguistic importance. Because if we cast off objective reality and we're saying that, like, the physical reality which governs my body is not important in any way, shape, or form, what really matters is my own subjective mindset and other people acknowledging that subjective mindset. So that's why language is such a huge deal, and that's why, like, there's such a push in corporations and in governments not to, like, mispronounce someone or dead name someone. Society has to guarantee that right to confirm my own subjective worldview. You also have the breakdown of the nuclear family. If you read a lot of, like, the gender theories and a lot of the radical feminists, like, you'll see that, like, calls on the most radical end, you'll see, like, calls for the abolition of family and more of, like, going into communist, like, utopia, where parents and kids have really nothing to do with each other. That's what Shula Smith Firestone, second wave feminist, if that means anything to anyone, advocates in her book, The Dialectic of Sex. And that's, like, a more extreme example. But the move in society right now is to not see marriage as very important, and certainly not to see marriage as a lifelong covenant. Rather, it's a contract that you can be in for as long as you want. It can involve 2 or more parties. And then we have the erasure of sexual difference. So the fact that you're biologically male or biologically female really does not matter in any way, shape, or form, which is really problematic for the church, as is obviously the breakdown of the nuclear family. So that's the gender theory, like, who man is and what man is. And when I say man, I mean, like, I'm referring to human, like, the human being, male and female. So we'll jump into Catholic anthropology now. And I'll give the basic story of, like, creation and what the human person is and who the human person is in the fall and how Jesus redeems us and how we relate to God now. So, in simple, what is the human person? What is a human being? Aristotle defines the human person as a rational animal. Man is a rational animal. Rational designating the fact that he has a spiritual faculty in him, and animal designating the fact that he has a physical or material element in him. So we're body-soul composites. And what's important to know is that whenever we're going through the book of Genesis, God is creating the whole world, and he keeps on calling it good. Like, and God said that it was good. God said that it was good. And then he's making the world in the 6th day, and we get to the culmination of all creation on the 6th day when he makes man and woman. And what does he call them but good? So the human persons are the crown of creation, and they're essential in God's plan. And they're given the ability to exercise dominion, not to destroy all of creation, but to shepherd it and to take care of it. So human life at the end of the day has to be seen as a good from God that has to be accepted with gratitude. So male and female is the crown of creation. And additionally, man is made, man and female, man and woman are made in the image and likeness of God. So we have something called human dignity that gives us a certain set of rights. So you can never lose your human dignity no matter what you do, no matter how evil something that you do may be. It's with us always, just because of the mere fact that we're made in the image and likeness of God. So again, humans are composed of body and soul, that is material and spiritual principle. The soul, think of the soul as the innermost aspect of a person. It's the spiritual principle of us. And then you have the body, which is what the soul animates. So what the soul makes like alive. So what you're seeing, my soul is currently animating right now. And we have an eternal and rational soul as humans. So, but the body shares in the dignity of the image of God. That's coming from the Catechism of the Catholic Church. We're obliged to regard our bodies as good and accept them with gratitude. It's not, I think that for so many different reasons we have accepting the fact that our bodies are good. Like God calls the human person good, and that's both soul and body. Your body is a good thing. And the reason why God gave you a body is because that was in his eternal plan for all creation, which we'll get into in a little bit. Again, our bodies are called temples of the Holy Spirit as baptized Christians. So we're obliged to regard our bodies as good and to accept them with gratitude. And the body is the foundation of personal identity. The body is not an obstacle to be overcome or a lifeless tool to be manipulated. So our body informs us of who we are as people, and it's essential for us. So we'll go into creation and kind of Genesis. So male and female, he created them from the very beginning of time, or at least from the very beginning of human time. God made man and woman, and that was in his plan of creation. That was started like with the animals and with ultimately man and woman, right? This is not a flaw of the system. This is part of his essential plan of creation. And to that point, men and women, there's no superiority between the two. It's not like man is better than woman. He's superior to woman. Woman is a lesser creation than him. Rather, there's an equal and shared dignity between the two. Men and women are equal, and they both share in the same human dignity. So, sex is also binary. I know there's some common objections to that I'll address in a little bit, but you're either male or female. And the male-female relationship is celebrated throughout the entire Bible. This differentiation between man and woman is good, and our bodies are good. Again, the fact that you're man is a good thing. The fact that you're woman is a good thing. I hope all of us are proud of the sex that we're in, or at least are happy that we're either male or female, right? Because ultimately that's what God made us to be. And again, our sex should be accepted with gratitude for God. So, sexual differentiation allows for interpersonal unity and for new life to form. Ultimately, all of our cells and all of our entire body, all of our organs were made as complete units except for our reproductive organs. It's only when the male reproductive system comes in contact with the female reproductive system that new life is able to form. And that holds true throughout the entire animal kingdom, including human beings. It also allows for the union between spouses, and for that union to bear more fruit in the form of new life. So our bodies ultimately have a spousal meaning that's built into them. So we're supposed to give each other, give ourselves to the other, like a radical sign of giving, of self-gift. So ultimately, again, our sex and our gender is a gift from God that should be accepted with gratitude. So we'll get into the fall now. So Adam and Eve sinned. I think most of us know the story that they ate of the apple and sinned by being disobedient with God. And that's all good, but I want to focus more on the consequences of original sin and of the fall. So before the fall, you had something called original harmony, where the human being was completely in harmony with God. There's no strife between the two. The man-woman relationship was completely harmonious. There was no bickering. There was no temptation to use the other. Just imagine that as for those of you who've been married or currently married. Just imagine that you and your spouse just get along really well, and there's not a whole lot of problems in your relationship. There's no sin in your relationship, right? Be nice. The human person with himself. So there's no strife against body and soul. So St. Paul says that I do the things that I do not want to do. And it's because our bodies and concupiscence is always inflaming against us to go against what's true and good and right and beautiful. Imagine just being completely ordered and your soul saying this is good, and the body completely oh yeah, there's no resistance to that. So there's no passions that get in your way. All your emotions and passions are completely in line with what's reasonable and God's law. And then finally, humanity with creation. There's no temptation to exploit creation. Rather, there would have been a harmonious relationship in all of creation, where man and woman are exercising providential dominion over creation and taking care of creation. Whenever the fall comes, that ruins the entire set of harmony, right? Original harmony is no longer maintained. So going through these four relationships, God moves from being a friend who they walk with in the cool of the garden, now to be a master to be feared. So in the man-woman relationship, there's the temptation to treat the other person as an object to be used and not a person to be loved. And that's especially the case in the realm of lust, right? But not only love, but manipulating others so that they can satisfy your own personal desires. So sexual difference, the male-female dichotomy, is viewed as oppressive, as objectification, as opposition, and not a gift anymore. The other sex seems to always be a stumbling block, especially before Jesus Christ. They're not a gift to be celebrated, but something that is a continual source of frustration for us. And that's really prevalent, I think, in our society right now. A lot of hatred that goes on between the sexes. Concupiscence, as I said, it makes our bodies rebel against our souls. So we're disordered within ourselves. We have unruly passions. And then creation is something to be exploited. But importantly, the fall and the first sin, original sin, it wounds but does not destroy human nature. That's an important point. I'm not going to go into it, but it's a really important point as far as theology goes. So human nature isn't obliterated by the fall. And then we're going to restoration and what Jesus Christ does for each of us. So Jesus restores and redeems human nature to such an extent that it even goes beyond what Adam and Eve had. I know that's hard to believe because we don't experience that in the here and now, but the possibility to surpass what even Adam and Eve had, because now we undergo the process of becoming like unto God. The process of divinization or theosis, where we can enjoy a radical union with God that not even Adam and Eve could achieve. And if we don't get there on earth, and not a lot of us do, we'll certainly get there in heaven. So these gifts go beyond what Adam and Eve had. And importantly, I just want to point out that Jesus Christ became incarnate, and that changes everything for us, right? It's not like God, again, it confirms the fact that God made the human person, body and soul, and that was good. It's not like God was disgusted by the human body. It's not like God was disgusted by his own creation. Rather, God loves his creation so much that he's willing to inhabit a body on his own through Jesus Christ. And that shows us the supreme dignity of both the body and the soul and of the human person. So he injects divine grace to empower relationships, those fourfold relationships with God, the man-woman relationship, our relationship with ourselves, and our relationship with creation, so that we can begin to live out a more ordered relationship in all those aspects. And we can begin to see the human body and human nature as a gift again, instead of something that's oppressive to us. And then just a quick note, I think that Jesus Christ's work on the cross and resurrection, it also reveals the sacramentality of the body. What's a sacrament? It's a visible sign that's doing invisible work of grace in us. So now the body, in all of its physicality, reveals the soul or the spiritual principle in man and woman, and reveals the fact that divine work is at play in our souls and our bodies. So some big takeaways. Your sex and gender is a gift. The fact that you're male or female is a gift from God, right? And that should be accepted with gratitude. Your body is a gift. And I know that's hard. I'll talk about this in a little bit. And I know that can be hard to believe because our bodies often present such stumbling blocks for us. But your body is ultimately a gift from God and is a gift from God that we should love, that we should nourish, that we should support. Your femininity in your own way that you live it out is a gift. And your masculinity in the way that you live it out is a gift. And I'll go into that in the next slide. So the goal is to lovingly accept yourself, body and soul, your masculinity or femininity. And that's the goal, but it's also essential to being in an ordered and harmonious relationship with God, with others, and with all of creation, and with yourself. So if you hate your own body, chances are that, and most likely the case is going to be that you're going to hate other people's bodies too. Right? And the loving acceptance of yourself, your body and soul, all your weaknesses, all your strengths, is essential to knowing yourself and being able to be in an ordered relationship with other people. If you hate yourself, you're probably not going to be able to love other people well. So the two sexes are asymmetrical, meaning that they're different. Clearly, men and women are different down to our cellular levels, and that difference informs our personalities and who we are as people. Nonetheless, we share equal dignity and are complementary. So this is an important point. The reciprocity and the complementarity of the man-woman relationships is really, I think, important to understand. And the best, I know there's a lot of really big terms there, but the best way to understand it, I think, is by using the analogy of singing. Whenever you hear a woman's voice singing, it's something that's unbelievably beautiful, right? He's like a really great singer, and you're just wowed by that. And the same thing can be said for male voices as well, and men's singers. Like, think of Botticelli singing the Ave Maria, right? It's a beautiful thing to behold. But whenever the two are united, like in a duet or something like that, it's like stunning to hear the man and the woman, the highness of the woman's voice and the gentleness and tenderness of the woman's voice with the more like huskier baritone strength of the man's voice. And those two just complement each other so well whenever you have like a singing duet. And the same goes for us as people, like especially this is showcased in marriage. Whenever you have a couple that lives out the marital life really well and is raising children, and despite all their flaws and mistakes and the fact that they don't know what they're doing, it's a beautiful thing to behold. When a man and his wife are like living out the marital vocation well. So the two sections are complementary and they're meant for a reciprocity, a self-gift to one another. So that brings us to gender stereotypes. So that's most of like Catholic Church teaching on that. I feel pretty firm that that's most of what the Catholic Church teaches as far as the Catholic anthropology and as far as like the gender theory. I'm going to take a break from Catholic, like strictly Catholic stuff, and go to like Jarek moment right now. These are my own thoughts that I've kind of developed. I don't think they're against the Catholic Church, and I think they're with the Catholic Church, but I'm willing to be challenged on it. But I think this is just a really important like note to make. The gender stereotypes, this is the partial truth that people like Judith Butler are getting at whenever they're saying that like your biological sex doesn't matter. They say that just gender stereotypes mean absolutely nothing. Gender stereotypes, like, they vary from culture to culture and they're different throughout place and time. But I think many of these can be unbelievably harmful. I know as a man, like some of the gender stereotypes that we're encountered with are that we're expected to be unexpressive and unemotional. That we're supposed to be naturally aggressive and dominate other people. And finally, like in our American society in specific, tells us that we should focus on the 3 B's, namely the ball field, the billfolds, and the bedroom. Like that's just, we laugh, but like that's just the stereotype that we're like engaged in as even like young kids, and especially as teenagers, as we're trying to find ourselves out as boys and young men and eventually men. That like we're supposed to be like have athletic prowess. That's what makes you a man, right? If you're like super athletic and you can like really dominate on every sport, that's what makes you a man. Like if you make tons of money, that's like, yes, you've done it. Good job. You're super masculine. And then lastly, if you're like super promiscuous and able to have like a lot of sexual intercourse, like that just makes you like just such a man, right? But I think those are just unbelievably false, and those are all huge lies. Because it's like, that's what society is telling us, but let's look at the values of the gospel for a second, right? Jesus wept whenever his friend Lazarus died, and shows unbelievable outpourings of emotion throughout the Gospels. While Jesus did overturn the money changer tables in the temple, he also refers to himself as meek and humble of heart, as gentle and lowly, right? And lastly, Jesus died as a broke virgin, right? He remained celibate throughout his entire life, and he lived out a poor life from the moment he was born to the moment he died. I just want to challenge us, like, are we getting our idea of, like, what makes a man in his masculinity, what makes, like, a real man? Are we getting that from our expectations from society, or are we getting it from the gospel? I think that, obviously, as Catholics, we should model, as Catholic men, we should model, like, our own masculinity after Jesus Christ and St. Joseph. It's the ability to pour yourself out in love and to give life to other people. I think that's the core of like masculinity. For the women, you might be in an even tougher position than men, especially girls today. So women, as far as the stereotypes go, are seen to be irrational and too emotional. Women are expected to be weak, and women's worth is tied up with their physical appearance, right? And that was particularly heartbreaking. I mean, I can go back to stories of my mom, whenever she'd go to her boyfriend's houses, and they'd have like bikini pictures of Farrah Fawcett or other models. And that was the expectation that they were expected to live up to. Like, your worth as a human person, your worth as a female was tied in with how you looked. And if you were, like, had a model figure, and how little you could eat, and how, like, gorgeous and how many men you had chasing after you, right? And that, for a lot of instances, especially today, has been, like, proliferated in society with the rise of social media, and especially things like TikTok and Twitter and stuff. That's like just a complete lie. A woman's worth is not tied in with her emotional, like with her physical appearance. And women are called to be like strong as well, right? To live in their own nature. Ultimately, it's my belief that there's nothing that you can do or that you have to do to become a man or a woman. That goes back to Judith Butler's gender performance theory, right? We don't become a man or we don't become a woman by like acting in these ways, by acting in any sort of way. It'd be like, in order to be a real man, you have to like do X, Y, or Z. In order to be a real woman, you have to look or act in this sort of way. Because ultimately your sex is gifted to you. You're masculine just by the fact that you're biologically male, and you're feminine just by the fact that you're biologically female. I really wish someone had told that to me when I was in my own teenage years, my early 20 years. For a really long time, I struggled with just like feeling like I was never man enough. There's nothing that I could do to become like man enough, and especially when it came to like vanity and physical appearance, I'm like, I have to look a certain way so that I'll be like manly enough or masculine enough, and then I'll finally have made it. Like if I have enough girls who are attracted to me, then that's what makes me like more manly. And that's just like was such a lie. It wasn't really until I got into seminary that I was able to work through some of these things that I saw for what it is. Like my masculinity, my own particular brand of masculinity is a good thing. And God's given me the personality that I have right now. And that's a great blessing. And there's great diversity within the stereotype of like within the genre of masculinity, and there's great diversity within the genre of femininity. And that's a good thing. You can be like a tomboy. My sister certainly was and wore camo and like jeans and liked to hunt and fish. And that was her own particular brand of femininity that she wore. And that's not a bad thing. Like that's allowed. You can have your boys like, if he likes playing with pink toys or dolls, that's okay. You don't have to freak out. There's enough room within the brand of like masculinity to allow for that. Especially for kids who like don't even know anything and change their mind like 7 times a day about the same subject. I have my nieces and nephews and it's mind-boggling. ultimately, I think that masculinity is rooted in the potential to give life, because that's what our sex characteristics do. What does the man do? He gives life. And I think ultimately femininity is rooted in the potential to receive and gestate and bear life. Right? I don't know what that looks out like concretely. I haven't done that much thought into it. But I think that's what our masculinity and femininity is ultimately tied in with. So common objections. I want to go over potentiality and actuality. A lot of people will say to the point of like, well, if I define woman as an adult human female, then what happens to people who aren't actually able to give birth, like, or able to conceive, like infertile women? What about postmenopausal women? What about women who have mastectomies or hysterectomies, or women with a Y chromosome? And they're like, okay, well, in actuality, women, like there's women who don't fit that definition. But we're not talking about the actual existence of these things. We're talking about a woman's, like, a woman or man, their potentiality. So, in specific, a woman is the kind of human being whose body is organized around the potential to gestate new life. So this potentiality belongs to femaleness, and it's always present, even if there's some condition, such as age or disease, that prevents that potential from being actualized. And we can turn to infertility in specific that helps to prove this. For example, a male human that cannot get pregnant is not deemed infertile because he never had the potential to gestate life within himself. A woman, however, who cannot get pregnant a woman who cannot get pregnant does have the potential to gestate life, and so she's considered infertile. Right? So it's the fact that all of your entire body, all your cells have the potentiality, even if they can't be actualized for whatever reason, to gestate new life, and the same applies in its own way to maleness. So I think having the potentiality eliminates all these little exceptions that people bring up. And then importantly, the other big objection that people will be there's tons of intersex people. There's studies that have been that have gone on that have named 1 in every 1.27 people out of 100 are intersex. And so there's been more studies, and this is the one that I'm going to quote from Leonard Sachs. It says that the vast majority of individuals often characterized as intersex are unambiguously male or female. So there's ways to play with data, and there are ways to categorize things that stretch the imagination to include people in the realm of intersex. So even if the presentation of maleness or females is atypical in some way, the vast majority of cases can still be readily identified as birth as male or female. So that means that 2 out of every 10,000 births aren't readily recognizable at birth, and 99.98%. And just because it's not recognizable at birth which one you are, or whether you're female or male, this doesn't mean that you're not female or male. Our sex isn't determined ultimately by our secondary sex characteristics, but by our primary sex characteristics, and that's gamete production, right? Either ovaries or testes. That's what primarily identifies us. So sometimes you have to wait to puberty to see which one they are, and so their physical appearance will change in different ways, and then it's a lot easier to identify. But even notwithstanding that, making exceptions to rules is generally not a good thing to do. So we don't want to make the exception the rule. Just generally a bad thing, especially such a small and narrow exception. Okay, so that's all the theory. I'm sure there's a lot of questions and comments and challenges and things that you want to continue to understand about that. But I want to get into the pastoral section because this is a really, really important part. So remember, I just finished laying out and critiquing the theories, and now I want to get into how do we care for those people who are actually identified as transgender. The key is to accompany people on the journey, and this is where Pope Francis was really brilliant. I'm quoting from Evangelium Gaudium quite a bit here. So we need to accompany others with mercy and patience as they go through the eventual stages of personal growth. And these stages occur progressively. We're all on our journey towards holiness in God, and we're all on our journey to accept the Catholic Church's teachings on any range of subjects. We have no idea what God's doing in a particular person's life. Sometimes he has to break them down so much to where they realize their need for him and their ultimate conversion, right? So we have to realize that each person's situation before God and their life and grace are mysteries that we cannot fully know. So we just don't know where a person's at in their journey with God or what he's doing with their life. We can't judge other people. We can judge their actions for sure, but we can't judge the other person as, oh, this person's not worthy of my love, or this person isn't worthy of my time or attention, or this person's too sinful. We don't know where they stand at in the relationship before God. And ultimately, he says that the art of a covenant teaches us to remove our sandals before the sacred ground of another. I love that. We're made in the image and likeness of God, and there's nothing that can, remove that from us. And in that way, we can remove our sandals before the sacredness of the other person. And how much so even for baptized Christians who become sons and daughters of our good and loving Father. That because each of us are made in the image and likeness of God, there's something sacred that's been imprinted on all of us. So whenever we can see the human person, we can see a reflection of God. And we should treat them accordingly, with compassion and with love. So the Diocese of Davenport, they put out, they're in Iowa, they put out 5 principles for accompanying people who identify as transgender. And I'll break all of these down with different slides, but they are recognizing the dignity of the human person, acknowledging the reality of their experience, leading with love and listening, seeking the expertise of others, and going by a case-by-case approach. So first, I've talked about this a lot, I feel like, but every human person possesses an infinite human dignity, grounded in his or her very being, because they are created in the image and likeness of God and redeemed by Jesus Christ. This is coming out from a 2024 document called Dignitas Infinita, from the Dicastery of the Doctrine of the Faith that Pope Francis signed. That's on human dignity. So this fundamental human dignity cannot be lost. And indeed, individuals can be even more worthy of our love and respect, namely the poor, the downtrodden, the weak, the scorned, and the despised. Jesus had a special place in his heart for the poor and for those who were social outcasts. Think about all those in jail. Think about all those in hospitals or nursing homes. He tells us, whoever you did for the least of these, you did for me. Our heart should go out with even more compassion and love to those who are weak and downtrodden. So in that sense, they can be more worthy of our respect and love. And then again, every sign of unjust discrimination must be avoided to respect the other person's human dignity, regardless of their sexual orientation or gender identification. So that person ultimately, even if they're totally disagreeing with the Catholic view, even if they change their life in ways that we consider super harmful, we still shouldn't unjustly discriminate them, and we shouldn't cast them aside as having no value, no meaning, or no worth. So acknowledging the reality, I'm going to camp out on this for a little bit here. So I think a lot of times for people who don't understand the transgender movement and why people decide to transition, it can be hard to understand this, but people actually feel like they're in the wrong body. There are people exist in society, and it's not just some TikTok trend that they're inspired by, or some cultural brainwashing that they're oh, it's just a phase, they're just doing whatever is really popular and a fad right now. There are people who are actually in an immense amount of suffering because they feel like they're in the wrong body. And it's not something to be making fun of. It's a reality in their subjective minds. And they didn't choose this. And it's a heavy burden for them to carry. These people are carrying very heavy crosses, and we should be sensitive to that reality. For some numbers, 40% of transgender identifying adults attempted to commit suicide, and 30% of transgender identifying youth attempted to commit suicide in 2015. They're going through acute mental distress a lot of the people, so much so that they try and take their own lives. The people who you see that are like dressing or identifying as transgender. 58% of transgender identifying people reported having a psychiatric diagnosis as compared to 13% of a general normal population. Right? They're under an immense amount of mental distress and having a lot of like mental problems that are going on. And this could be like the most controversial thing that I say in this entire presentation, but I'd venture to say that perhaps if you're experiencing a discordance between your body and your soul and your subjective mindset and objective reality, that there's got to be some kind of mental issues that are in play, maybe in all of those cases, to have that kind of like separation between the two. Our hearts should go out with compassion for these people because they're suffering immensely. Right? Not to mention the physical effects that like going through transition, whether it's like, especially if it's hormonal or surgery, it's like physically nightmarish. The amount of pain that you experience in all of that. Because whenever you try to start making yourself the opposite sex and get all this surgery that's done, it turns out that the objective reality and the fact that we're like, sex goes down to our very cells, your body starts rebelling against those surgical interventions and those hormonal therapies that people have been retrieving. And now I won't get into like the details because it's pretty grotesque, the amount of pain that they're in, but these things have like serious consequences. So our hearts should break for people who identify as transgender. And for that, we should listen to them respectfully, sympathetically, and patiently listen to the stories, should they ever have the chance to open up to us. So, continuing to acknowledge the reality, I think a lot of us, and myself included, have very little experience into the transgender, like subjective experience. Like, why would you ever want to go over to like the other sex? I think it's a thing that a lot of us ask ourselves. I think a lot of us have body issues. Again, our body isn't seen as a gift to ourselves. We have a tendency to objectify other people's bodies and objectify our own body. Again, I'm not enough. Like, my body's not good enough. I don't look good enough. It plays out in some really heartbreaking ways. And I want to turn to Abigail Favales, and I've been using her book quite a bit throughout this presentation. She's a professor out of Notre Dame, and she wrote The Genesis of Gender. And it just like really sheds light. Well, it does a really good job giving the Catholic teachings on all of these things, but also engaging like a very compassionate pastoral approach to people who identify as transgender. And it's formed like a good part of this talk. But I want to give she says it a lot better than I ever could. She has a lot better stories in here that give some insight maybe to the transgender experience that maybe some of us can relate to. At rock bottom, I think the males who want to go over to female, I think there's a desire to be, there's a yearning to be desired by other people. A lot of times as boys and as men, we're told that our masculinity, our maleness is toxic, that it's destructive, that it's ruining society, and that we're fundamentally bad. Further, as soon as a male goes through puberty, he's seen as something that's bad, it's awkward, and no one really wants them for a time. So I think that it might be a desire to be desired by other people because they see women and females getting attention and they want that too. Again, it's harder for me to understand the male side. I have a little bit of better insight because of this book into why a woman might want to go over to the male side. I think it's fundamentally the desire not to be sexually objectified in our hypersexualized culture. I think it's the ability to shield yourself off from kind of the male gaze, kind of the gaze of lust, the desire to turn that person into an object to be used for my own sexual gratification and for my own desires, and to turn you into a piece of meat. I think that's what fundamentally most women who want to become men are running away from. And so I'll just go over some of these sections. This is from Ovid's Metamorphoses, Greek mythology. So Canis was famed for her beauty. She was resistant to marriage, and she's raped by the god Neptune as she's walking on a lonely shore. Neptune, like some sadistic genie, offers to grant her one wish in recompense. The story says, And Canis answered, "The wrong you've done demands the great prayer that I never again be able to suffer this. Make me a woman no longer, and you will have given me all." She spoke the last words in a huskier voice that seemed like a man's, and so it was, for the sea god had already granted her prayer. Right? The desire to shield yourself off from being able to experience like traumatic effects like that. Coming from the experience of someone who suffered from anorexia, she recounts at school, the girl discovers that her readily shrinking body is admired not so much as an aesthetic or sexual object, but for the strength of will and self-control it projects. As her body begins to lose its traditional female curves, its breasts and its hips and rounded stomach, it begins to feel and look more like a spare, lanky male body. She begins to feel untouchable and out of reach of hurt, invulnerable, clean and hard as the bones etched into her silhouettes. She despises in particular all those parts of her body that continue to mark her as female. "If only I could eliminate my breasts," she says, "cut them off if need be." And then Favali goes on to say, if being a woman, if being female means to be degraded, to be dominated, to be depersonalized, and reduced to an object for someone else's use, then I too no longer want any part of it. Make me a woman no longer. She says, is it any wonder that our girls are in revolt? So growing up, as soon as a girl enters in puberty, she becomes susceptible again to that male gaze and being treated more like an object instead of a person to be loved. If you androgynize your own body, then you become immune in a sense to that kind of like lustful gaze that other people turn to you towards. I think that's a lot of reason why girls in particular are going over transitioning to males. And the rate of girls who are transitioning right now is skyrocketing, way more than boys going over to girls. I think it's because of our hypersexualized culture that we live in. And the challenge then becomes on men, right, us men, to like work on our own lustful desires and to integrate our own like sexuality with like what's true and good and right. Not to use women as the objects of our personal gratification, but to love them and to love them as Christ would have loved them. This is for the mothers in the room, anyone who's given birth to a child, where Favali's talking about postpartum aftermath, the idea of like body dysphoria, and I hope some of you can relate to this. So recounts in our own experience. After each of my births, I have to shuffle past a mirror to get there. I can't help but to look at the stranger I see, as if she is a monstrous gorgon and I am trapped by her gaze. I see a body that does not look like me, that never matches how I appear in dreams or my own mental image. She is a dazed, half-crazed look. She fills me with disgust, that postpartum Medusa. She is grotesque and excessive, bleeding and leaking and saddled with flesh. Even now as I write this, almost 9 months postpartum, I still can't look at myself in the mirror without feeling disgust and a desire to punish my body, to starve it into submission. When I get out of the bath, I stand off to the side, hiding from my own reflection. The acuteness of the dualism I feel. However, this dualism tends to resolve when I stop breastfeeding and my body deflates like a balloon. And she says, reflecting on this, it took years and multiple births to accept that my invasive thoughts and self-loathing were pathological, that is a mental illness. A clear sign of postpartum anxiety and depression. While my first instinct was to resist the label and to power through on my own, to hunker down in an alcove of denial and shield myself from reality, now I understand the reality of my maternal body and the reality of my mental illness. Like that dualism between body and soul, like it can be a really strong mental illness. And I hope that illustrates at least some of the reasons why people in our culture might want to transition to a different sex. The third principle is leading with love. So we're called to look on other people with the same compassion as Jesus looks on them. to exercise that same level of charity that Jesus wants for other people. Remember that Jesus ate and drank with the most grievous of sinners in his day, that is tax collectors and prostitutes. He wasn't afraid that his own holiness was going to be affected by them, and neither should we. We should never be afraid to encounter and to be at least willing to talk with other people who identify as transgender. Yeah. And I think the scene of the woman caught in adultery is particularly helpful in this instance. Whenever Jesus says, "Let him who has no sin throw the first stone." Right? And he says, "Woman, has no one condemned you?" And he says, "No, they've all left." And he says, "Neither do I condemn you." That should be our first reaction. Not of judgment, not of a merciless interaction with them, but never being afraid to actually meet them where they're at and to start to walk with them if they're open to that. To just simply be friends with them and not be afraid that somehow our own holiness is going to be lowered by the fact that we're friends with them, because that's exactly what Jesus did. However, importantly, at the end of that story, he calls her to go and sin no more, as he's so many times had. Ultimately, loving another person is willing their good, and that what's their ultimate good is the salvation of their body and soul. He calls them to go and sin no more. And so that's where Pope Francis's art of accompaniment comes back into play, is that the place, you have to walk with someone for a very long time, and you get to see this as a seminarian and God willing a priest, you have to walk with someone for a long time to kind of have them open up to you and explain to the reason, while they're not going to Mass. And sometimes it'd be really dramatic, why they're why they're not living in a regular marriage situation. It's not about condemning or judging them. It's about listening to them and hearing them out. And then eventually, whenever you get to the point where you can, to call them to bigger and better and holier things and follow the Lord's law. So again, the most basic expression of love for other people who we don't understand is to simply listen to them and try to understand them best we can. Fourth step, involving other people. So we should ask for help. Parents and godparents who have someone who identifies as transgender in their family shouldn't be afraid of the judgment that they'll receive, especially from people in the church community. It's my opinion, again, this isn't strictly church teaching here, and neither are these 5 points as far as the universal church goes, but it's my own personal opinion that until the church becomes a community where people who identify as transgender or sexual minorities, or people who have not perfect sexual orientations, right? Until the church becomes a community, a place where they feel more welcome than they do on TikTok and the online chat threads, we're never going to be able to fully bring them into our church. That doesn't mean that we approve of the way that they are living out their lives. That doesn't mean that we approve of what they're doing, and that unwillingness to approve will drive a lot of people away. But for the people who remain curious, we should be a good community for all of them. We should remain a strong community of love for all of the people who remain curious and want to know more about the Lord. Bringing more people into the situation, especially for families of people who identify as transgender, can help create a sense of solidarity and lessen the burden that they feel. So if one of your friends comes to you, or one of your family members comes to you, and say, "Hey, I know this person who's identifies as transgender," just give them a listening ear, being willing to talk to them. Or if your son or daughter is identifying as transgender, or grandparents, sometimes it'd be good just to go to counseling, just to be able to work that out with that. And then fifth is going by case-by-case approach. I think blanket policies can be really harmful and risk doing a lot more harm than good. Each person is unique, their story is unique, their life situation is unique. So being able to treat each one of them as a unique person is important. I've said this over and over again in my interactions with other people, but we should treat each person as an individual to be loved and not a problem to be solved. Whenever we're seeing someone in whatever way that's not doing something that's according to God's law or the church teaching, we shouldn't think, "Oh, how am I going to solve that problem?" We should think first and foremost, how can I love that person the best? So as far as miscellaneous matters, and that ties in with those 5 practical points, we're getting the miscellaneous side now, that there's a priority of the relationship with God over the law. So, as Pope Benedict says in Deus Caritas Est, being Christian is not the result of an ethical choice or lofty idea, but the encounter with an event, with a person, and that's Jesus Christ. And whenever you're able to encounter Jesus Christ in a relationship and experience the love that He has for each one of you, that change is everything about your life. So that relationship with Jesus Christ, that encounter with Jesus Christ, and being able to know that you're unconditionally loved exactly as you are, here and now, no matter what your state in life is. Having that sense of unconditional love will change everything in your life, and that's a gradual change that happens, right? For each of us, I'm sure that there's a point, it might have been gradual, but for some of us at least, there's a point where we had a radical experience with the love of Jesus Christ, and that changed everything for us. So taking the laws, and I love the law. I promise you, I love the law, so much so that I studied it, right? Like, I love the natural law, I love God's law, I love, like, societal laws. I think they're so important and so good. But presenting the law, and especially the Ten Commandments and the Christian law and the moral law that the church has prescribed, which is good, presenting that without the love of Christ hollows it out and makes it an impossible burden on other people. It wasn't until I encountered Jesus Christ that any of those Ten Commandments, any of the laws that the church had, made any sense. And ultimately, the law is supposed to lead us into a greater relationship and a greater relationship with Jesus Christ and help us to grow in holiness. We grow in holiness exactly by following out those laws to their fullest extent. But we have to lead with the love of Jesus Christ first. Pronouns, super important point. What do we do? Because on one hand, we want to acknowledge the subjective experience of what a person is feeling, and we want to leave the door open to evangelization. We don't want to dead name them or misgender them and have them never want to talk to us again about the possibility of Jesus Christ. So that's one thing that we're dealing with, but also we want to acknowledge objective reality and the truth. So we're kind of caught in a hard place as far as wanting to evangelize and convert people, right? So I go back, I don't have a perfect answer for this. I go back and forth. Ultimately, if it's not true, then it's not loving. If it's not true, then it's not pastoral. And we can progressively reveal the truth to someone, and that's fine. But it's a hard balance that each of us have to use our prudence, our decision-making ability in each and every single case. However, I found that it's incredibly easy when I'm ministering to people who identify as transgender. I find it's incredibly easy just to avoid pronouns and avoid name. It's not too bad of hey, how are you doing today? Hey, you. Whenever you get some practice it just becomes pretty normal, pretty natural, and not really awkward. So that's a pretty nice way that I've found that I can kind of avoid the new names that they've taken on or the new pronouns that one might have taken on. So if you use your mind a little bit or quick on your feet and use you a lot, it helps. As far as work situation goes, that's really delicate. This is coming from Father Dan Antonio. He's really good at giving me a lot of pointers for the presentation whenever I submitted it to him. But he said, throw something in about work situations. So again, use your prudence. Yeah, prudence would dictate usually that you shouldn't engender your family in a way that you can lose your job by dead naming or mispronouncing someone. So the church doesn't have a teaching on you're absolutely not allowed to use someone's new pronouns or anything like that. But if it's bothering you that much, you can always look for a new job. My heart goes out on this issue. It's a really complicated one, and I don't have the answers for it. So yeah, try your best. Practical situation, I wanted to run this. So my child or godchild or grandchild identifies as transgender. What do I do? So the key is to be present to them, to listen to them, and love them. Not to overreact and be I can't believe this. I raised you better than this. The key is to be sympathetic, to sit them down and ask them what's going on. And first and foremost, just let them know I love you, and my heart breaks for you that you're going through this. Can we sit down and talk about that? That's the right reaction, right? To love them. So we should love them, and look to see if there's any underlying causes. It could be a phase, it could just be something that they're going through in childhood, or it could not be. It could be something that stays with them their entire life. And importantly, I mean, as parents, it's really important that you don't let your minors go through any medical procedures or therapies. Right? That's an essential point, and I just point to the England and Norway, which were the leaders on this, especially Norway, in minor transition surgeries and hormonal therapies. They've now banned that practice because they've seen so many people who have detransitioned and desisted from the transitioning process. Right, so you're not allowed to get any kind of hormonal therapy or surgery to transition to a different gender in those countries because they've seen so many bad effects and so many people have regretted it. I mean, we should never encourage anyone to go through with a transition surgery or hormonal therapy. But especially as parents, you have some control over what your minor does legally. So don't I would say absolutely don't let them get any kind of hormonal treatment. But walk with them nonetheless. Walk with them, hear them out. Try and get them the counseling, therapy that they need from a good Catholic counselor who understands Catholic anthropology, right? Chances are they've gone through some kind of trauma either that you're aware of or not aware of. Whenever you start to work away on that trauma, then a lot of those feelings, I think, can be resolved. As far as struggles go, a lot of people, I mean, I've had people who have said, I'm not coming to your talk because I don't agree with the Catholic Church's teaching on transgenderism. I said, that's fine. You should consider coming anyways. Just a general point, most people struggle with, or have struggled in their life with one or more of the teachings of the Catholic Church on any particular issue. Doesn't mean that we excise them from the community. That's not oh, well, you're just the worst and we're not going to let you worship with us anymore. We're all on our progressive journey. We're on our journey towards holiness and towards a greater faith in Christ. And so a lot of people have to wrestle with these things. A lot of people have to wrestle with a lot of these issues that the Catholic Church teaches, including the transgender issue or the sexual orientation issue. And they're trying to grasp it more and more. Right? So really controversial ones that I think a lot of us can struggle with, inside and outside of the church, are papal primacy, the Eucharist, confession, the Blessed Virgin Mary, the Church's teachings on human sexuality, including contraception, abortion, traditional male-female marriage, religious freedom, the death penalty, and the rest of the Church's social teachings. I know is a really big one that a lot of people don't understand or have trouble accepting. Immigration, ecumenism, and the traditional Latin Mass. We all have things that we struggle with. But let's struggle together and actually continue to try and understand each other, try to understand the Church's teachings more, and continue to grapple with these things, to listen and to dialogue so that we can journey together. So that's my plea for all of us, just because someone's not doesn't believe or subscribe to every single one of the tenets of the Catholic Church, we still need to walk with them. And hopefully as they fall more radically in love with God, they'll see and they'll want to live out those commandments and agree with the Catholic Church. I'm utterly convinced that the Catholic Church is right on everything that it teaches definitively. And I try to conform my own intellect and will to believe those things every day to be a faithful son of the Church. But it took a lot of time and a lot of grace to get to that point. Well, I've had to struggle with a couple of these in particular throughout my intellectual life, especially as I've been in school for forever. It doesn't stop. They tell me it's going to stop, but it doesn't. But it's it's just about journeying and accompanying together and calling each other on to holier and better things. So that's the bulk of the presentation. The sources, like I said, Dignitas Infinita, 2014. Male and female, he created them. Really great document, about 40 pages on how educators and parents and priests should approach the transgender issue. The Diocese Dad work with the guidelines for pastoral accompaniment for sexual and gender minorities. Really good document. The Genesis of Gender. If anyone is interested in going on a deep dive and understanding the transgender movement, it's philosophy, it's the medical side of everything. Abigail Falali wrote this really great book. Super recommend it. If you're interested on a deep dive, if you're just finding this presentation, great. But she's done a lot of really good work. I use Deus Caritas Est by Pope Benedict, Evangelii Gaudium by Pope Francis, the Catechism of the Catholic Church, and then a lot of spot strains from St. John Paul II. So those are kind of my sources. That's my email. Feel free to stop me after Mass or to email me or to reach out to me if you have any questions, challenges, comments, or concerns. But I have nothing to do after this but to go back to the office. So